Dear biology teachers, as you now know, climate change is one of the most significant issues of our time. The impacts of climate change are now becoming inseparable from our day-to-day lives. It is critical that our students are made aware of this issue and to understand the problem from different disciplinary perspectives. In this lecture, we show the links of Earth's climate and the biosphere, and we will show how you can teach some topics in the biological sciences using a climate-related example. In this lecture, we present educational resources that bring climate studies into the mainstream education in the biological sciences. These educational resources are of two types: teaching tools of different types. These include e-learning courses or MOOCs, classroom or lab activities, audio, video micro lectures, games, models, etc. They also include lesson plans with detailed step-by-step guides provided. These educational resources will allow you to teach topics in biology using climate-related examples without deviating from your prescribed syllabus. This will lead to increased climate awareness of your students. Again, I would like to emphasize the educational resources that we are presenting here, the lesson plans and the teaching tools, are all part of the syllabus and topics that you teach in your classrooms already. We present these educational materials where the use of such lesson plans or teaching tools integrate biological sciences with climate sciences. Using these digital pedagogical tools in your classroom, you can learn how to incorporate a multidisciplinary approach to teaching. How can you introduce relevant topics, in this case climate change, in your discipline? How do you effectively use technology in the classroom, and how can you enhance your students' learning? There are a wide variety of topics that we will show in this particular lecture, and we want to show how you can integrate climate science in your teaching by using educational resources to teach topics in the biological sciences. These include topics such as biodiversity, species and speciation, species distribution and species habitats, range shift, survival skills, phenology phenophases, leaf out flowering and bud burst, sex determination, human health epidemiology, vector-borne diseases, microbes and microbial growth, natural selection, and more. As you can notice by looking at this particular list, a lot of these topics are things that are already in your syllabus. What we would request you to do is to use the lesson plans that we will provide to teach these topics. The usage of such lesson plans, which integrate climate understanding with discipline topics, will lead to greater understanding of climate change for your student. So, let us begin by showing some lesson plans, and there are 4 that we will go through in this particular lecture. These are lesson plans on biodiversity and species extinction, lesson plans on natural selection, lesson plans on abiotic stress on plants, and lesson plan on microbial life. This is a lesson plan titled Biodiversity and Species Extinction Due to Climate Change. Now, all your biological sciences teachers are probably teaching topics such as biodiversity and species and speciation. We present this lesson plan, which integrates the understanding of concepts in biodiversity and species and speciation linked to climate change. You continue to teach topics in biology as per your syllabus, but the usage of this lesson plan in your classroom will also introduce climate change understanding amongst your students. Okay. The biodiversity of plant and animal species on planet Earth is threatened by several factors such as habitat loss, poaching, disease, overexploitation of natural resources, and introduction of invasive species. Climate change is expected to be one of the leading causes of species decline or extinction. This lesson plan discusses the extinction of one mammal species, the bramble K. melomis. It is believed to be the first mammalian extinction due to climate change. The usage of this lesson plan will now allow you to integrate the teaching of a climate science topic with a core topic in biological sciences or environmental sciences. This lesson plan is aimed at the undergraduate level. It belongs in biological sciences and also potentially in the environmental sciences. The topics in discipline include biodiversity, conservation, biogeography, endemic species, vulnerability of species, susceptibility of species, species extinction, habitat loss, endangered species, threatened species, mammalian extinction, and of course, the example of the bramble K. melomis. So, if you are a teacher in the biological sciences or environmental sciences and these are topics in your syllabus, we would request you to make use of a lesson plan like this in your classroom, where your students will not only learn about the concepts in biology or environmental sciences, but will also learn about climate change through the usage of this lesson plan. This is Australia specific because this particular species was found in Australia, beg your pardon. It requires online access and it takes about an hour or so in terms of time. This lesson plan contains several different teaching tools which are put together in a fashion that it can be used in the classroom by you. It contains a video which is about 8 minutes long that highlights the importance of biodiversity and briefly discusses the challenges of preventing its degradation due to human activities. There is also a review article that describes how climate change may alter the biodiversity of a region and potentially cause species extinction. There is an editorial called the Bramble K. melomis, the first mammalian extinction due to human-induced climate change, that explains the case of the extinction of this particular species due to climate change. A classroom or lab activity to better engage with your students to explore the status of local and global species of organisms using the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List for threatened species. This activity also includes a fact sheet that highlights the susceptibility of certain species due to climate change impacts. Now, provided to you is this step-by-step guide in the use of this lesson plan in your classroom. We have suggested these steps as a possible plan of action, and you may customize this lesson plan according to your preference, requirements, and needs of your students. So, let us begin in our classroom by introducing the topic. We play a video titled "What is Biodiversity and Why is it Important?" produced by the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, CSIRO Australia, to introduce the topic of biodiversity. In this video interview, understand the importance of biodiversity and its benefits. Stress to your students on how anthropogenic climate change may affect biodiversity. Also emphasize how certain species may possibly go extinct due to climate change. Following this topic introduction through a video, use a review article titled "How Does Climate Change Cause Extinction?" written by Cahill et al. From the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Biological Sciences to explain to your students the proximate causes of climate change related species extinction. Discuss the various case studies presented in the reading and assess the possible climatic factors responsible for the extinction of these species. Use the findings in this review to explain to your students that there may be both direct and indirect effects of climatic variations on the survival of a species. Also discuss how the inference of the proximate cause of species extinction may require scrutiny in several cases. You may now use a new reading, an editorial called "The Bramble K. melomis, the first mammalian extinction due to human-induced climate change" by Graham Fulton, to explain the case of the extinction of a mammalian species due to climate change. You can now carry on and explore local and global species for threats of extinction using the IUCN Red List to carry out a hands-on activity that shows the relationship between the extinction of the bramble K. melomis and climate change. Introduce your students to the information on the extinct mammal using this IUCN tool. There are several questions that you can ask your students in using this lesson plan. So, use the tools and concepts learned so far to discuss and determine answers to the following questions. What is biodiversity? What is the importance on biodiversity for the health of an ecosystem? What are the historical records of biodistribution of the mammal Bramble K. melomis? How has climate change led to the extinction of the Bramble K. melomis? How can climate related factors endanger the biodiversity of a region? The tools in this lesson plan will enable students, and this is under the learning outcomes of the usage of this lesson plan. So, this will enable students to 1. Understand the importance of biodiversity, 2. Explain the role of climate change in impacting biodiversity, 3. Discuss the causes for extinction of a species due to climate change, 4. Explain the susceptibility of certain species to climate variations. A list of all the resources and who they have been produced by is also provided in this particular lesson plan. Okay. Let us take the new example, a lesson plan on natural selection and climate change. This lesson plan will enable students to understand Darwin's theory of natural selection. They will learn how organisms such as pocket mice and snowshoe hares respond to changes in the environment and climate. The lesson plan will allow students to understand climate change as a selective pressure in natural selection and how it plays a role in the evolutionary rescue of a species that would otherwise be endangered due to climate change. Thus, the use of this lesson plan allows you to integrate the teaching of a climate science topic with a core topic in the biological sciences. This lesson plan is suitable for the undergraduate level. It is in the biological sciences. The topics in discipline which can be taught using this lesson plan include natural selection, selective pressure, evolution, speciation, evolutionary hotspots, genetic polymorphism, genetic variants, allelic frequencies. This is present online and the approximate time required for this lesson plan is between 30 to 60 minutes. This lesson plan includes a reading, which is a chapter reading that briefly introduces Darwin's theory of natural selection, an interactive video to illustrate Darwin's theory of natural selection that uses the example of fur coat color in pocket mice. It also contains a video and an associated reading that shows that climate change can be a selective pressure in natural selection. It uses the example of coat color in the snowshoe hare populations in North America. There is an optional computer lab-based simulation activity that you may use in your classroom based on your requirements, and this activity illustrates the changes in single gene allelic frequencies under a varying selective pressure. Here is a step-by-step guide to using this lesson plan in your classroom. We have suggested these steps as a possible plan of action. You may customize the lesson plan according to your preferences and requirements. Step 1. Introduce the topic with a reading. Use the in-chapter reading titled Major Themes in Evolution from the National Academy Press to introduce the topic of natural selection. Use this resource to explain how Darwin and Wallace proposed the theory of natural selection on variants within a species that explain the process of evolution. Also explain how Mendel's work explained how favored characteristics are inherited and eventually lead to speciation. Step 2. Illustrate this theory with an example with an interactive video. Use the interactive resource titled The Making of the Fittest Natural Selection and Adaptation by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute to illustrate an example of natural selection. Explain how a selection pressure of dark colored surfaces on light colored pocket mice has resulted in a natural selection for darker colored pocket mice that are better camouflaged against predators. Use the questions from this resource to quiz your students on their understanding of the theory of natural selection when a selective pressure is in play. Step 3. Correlate this understanding to a climate-related example of natural selection in another species. Play a video titled, "Will Snowshoe Hares Win the Race Between Evolution and Climate Change" by National Geographic to explain how reduced snowfall due to a warming climate behaves as a selective pressure on the seasonal coat color polymorphism of the snowshoe hare in North America. Note, snowshoe hares change coat colors in different seasons. It is white when the ground is snow covered and brown when it is not. This is to protect themselves from predators. Use this resource to stress to your students that the snowshoe hares from areas where the ground is snow covered or from areas where the ground is rarely covered with snow through the year show no seasonal change in coat color. Emphasize that the areas in between these regions are where most hares that seasonally change their coat color can be found. Use this associated reading by the Mills Lab from the University of Montana to show that research on snowshoe hares has established that these intermediary zones are evolutionary hotspots, and they show a higher percentage of non-color changing brown snowshoe hares due to the ground remaining snow-free for longer as a result of climate change. Explain how this is an example of evolutionary rescue of a species by selection for a character that affords better protection from predators in a changing environment, in this case due to climate change. So, hopefully, you can now start to see the link between your discipline topic and how it is related to climate change. Now, there is an optional activity that you may choose to do depending on your requirements. You can extend this thinking by using a simulation. This activity can be conducted if the teacher wishes to extend students' understanding of natural selection by their observations of changes in allelic frequencies over successive generations due to an adaptive advantage for varying selective pressures. This simulation by McGraw-Hill Education can be used to explain to your students how the allelic frequencies for a single gene that codes for body color changes through several generations when varying selection pressure is applied. A list of instructions of how you may be able to use this particular simulation is provided in this lesson plan. This exercise will enable students to observe changes in allelic frequencies over successive generations. They will be able to understand that if an allele is associated with an adaptive advantage, its frequency will increase in a population and may eventually get fixed, while an allele that does not have an advantageous adaptive trait will decrease in frequency and may eventually be lost from the population. You can extend the thinking of your students by discussing how a climate change related how a climate related change in environment could play a role in changing the allelic frequencies for the given gene. Using this lesson plan and the concepts learnt in this lesson plan, you can ask your students the following questions. What is Darwin's theory of natural selection? Can you illustrate this with an example? What is genetic polymorphism? Why is genetic variation critical to the survival of a species? What is selective pressure? How does it affect allelic frequency in successive generations of a population of organisms. The learning outcomes. The tools in this lesson plan will enable students to 1. Explain Darwin's theory of natural selection, explain changes in gene frequencies over successive generations due to a selective advantage, understand how natural selection affects biodiversity, and describe the role of different selective pressures on the evolution of the species. A lesson plan titled Abiotic Stress on Plants Due to Climate Change. As an undergraduate biological sciences teacher, you can use this set of computer-based tools in teaching about plant physiology, abiotic stress in plants, climate-related stress factors, and their influence on plant growth and development. This lesson plan discusses abiotic stress in plants and their effect on plant physiology. Students will learn about plant stress responses like acclimatization and adaptation to environmental change. A lesson plan titled Abiotic Stress on Plants Due to Climate Change. As an undergraduate biological sciences teacher, you can use this set of computer-based tools in teaching about plant physiology, abiotic stress in plants, climate-related stress factors, and their influence on plant growth and development. This lesson plan discusses abiotic stress in plants and their effect on plant physiology. Students will learn about plant stress responses like acclimatization and adaptation to environmental change due to climate change. Thus, the use of this lesson plan allows you to integrate the teaching of a climate science topic with a core topic in the biological sciences. The topics in this lesson include abiotic stress, stress physiology, temperature variations, heat stress, phenotypic plasticity, acclimatization in plants, adaptation in plants, and physiological plasticity. So, if these are topics that you teach in your classroom in the biological sciences, we would request you to take a further look at this lesson plan that integrates climate understanding with the core topic in the biological sciences. The approximate time required for this varies between 45 and 150 minutes depending on what resources you would like to use. The lesson plan includes several different teaching tools. You can start by showing an extract of a video to your students that introduces the topic of plant physiology and abiotic stress in plants. It explains how plants respond to these stresses phenotypically and physiology. The suggested video extract can be viewed from the beginning till about 27 minutes. The entire video is about 78 minutes in length or so. Please note, following this introduction, as teachers, you can choose to either use one or both of the following tools that I will discuss to discuss plant responses to abiotic stress due to climate-related factors. There is a lab activity, and this hands-on lab activity allows students to explore the role of stomata in regulating leaf temperature and water loss from plants under different environmental and climate conditions. Students will observe the nature and distribution of stomata of plants growing under such varied abiotic stresses and use the data to quantify differences in this plant. There is a video lecture that gives an overview of how vegetation responds to climate change in terms of phenotypic plasticity, range shifts, phenology, and population changes. Here is a step-by-step guide in using this lesson plan in your classroom or lab. We have suggested these steps as a possible plan of action. You may customize the lesson plan according to your preferences and requirements. First, introduce the topic by playing a video. This video lecture, titled Plant Stress Responses by Professor Thomas Owens of Cornell University, can be used to explain what plant stress is, and to define abiotic stressors as the external factors that affect plant physiology. List the factors that may affect plant growth and development by perturbing its physiology. Further, discuss with your students the types of responses shown by plants due to changes in their environment, like immediate responses, acclimatization, and adaptation. You can use this tool to explain phenotypic plasticity in plants and enable them to extend their range or region of optimal growth. Finally, you can use this lecture to distinguish short-term phenotypic plasticity from evolutionary adaptations exhibited by these plants in response to long-term environmental changes. Now again note, following this introduction, you can choose to use either one or both of the following tools to discuss plant responses to abiotic stresses due to climate change related factors. You may choose to conduct a hands-on lab activity should you have the time. This lab activity, titled Changing Planet, Withering Plants, Stressing Over Lost Water by Missy Holzer, Jennifer Bergman and Roberta Johnson of the Nesta Windows to the Universe team, can be used to enable students to explore the role of stomata in plants in regulating leaf temperature and controlling water loss from leaves under different environmental conditions. This includes a complete lab activity plan with background information in the form of a reading and links to other relevant readings and videos. A materials list and a link to download student worksheets is also provided in this resource. Follow the directions listed there in the lab activity plan. They will enable students to first gain background information through a reading and short video about climate related factors like high temperatures, low water availability due to changing precipitation patterns and the like, which can affect plants. Then the students can prepare slides, and under the microscope they can observe the stomata in leaves and study the differences in plants grown in diverse conditions of temperature and water availability. Students can use this data from their own observations to represent and compare the distribution of stomata using graphs in different plants of the same species, but grown under different environmental conditions. You can discuss other plant physiological parameters that may be affected by climate related factors. You may then choose to play a lecture to summarize the discussion and all the activities carried on thus far in your classroom. You can use this video lecture titled Vegetation Responses to Climate Change by Lawrence Venable from the University of Arizona to summarize plant responses to climate change by discussing their impacts on native vegetation, in this case in Arizona, USA. Reinforce student understanding about observed climate factors that could affect vegetation growth, such as increased CO2 levels, higher global temperatures, and changing precipitation patterns. Then, emphasize how plants respond to such environmental perturbations in the short and long term by showing phenotypic plasticity, acclimatization, and adaptation. Encourage a discussion on how these climatic factors nudge vegetation growth in other regions than were previously found and therefore can cause a range shift. Finally, discuss how climate change can cause changes in phenology and affect percentages of different species in a population by influencing plant growth and development. You can use the tools and the concepts learnt in this lesson plan to ask your students questions such as, what is abiotic stress? How does abiotic stress affect plant physiology? What is phenotypic plasticity in plants? How does stomatal conductance change in heat-stressed plants? Describe physiological plasticity in plants in response to climate-related abiotic stress factors. What is the difference between acclimatization and adaptation in plants in response to abiotic stress. How does vegetation growth respond to climate change? The learning outcomes of this lesson plan. The tools in this lesson plan will enable students to 1. Define abiotic stress in plants and describe the factors causing it. Understand plant stress physiology. Describe the role of stomata in plants under abiotic stress like high temperature and low water availability. Distinguish between acclimatization and adaptation responses to abiotic stress in plants. Understand how plants respond phenotypically, physiologically to climate-related factors. A lesson plan teaching about microbial life and climate change. As an undergraduate level biological sciences teacher, you can use this set of computer-based tools to help in teaching topics such as microbes, microbial growth, the role of microbes in the climate system, and the effects of global climate change on microbial growth and survival. The lesson plan allows students to learn about the relationship between microbes, the environment, and climate. The activity will explain the specific roles played by various microbes in the climate system. Thus, the use of this lesson plan allows you to integrate the teaching of a climate science topic with a core topic in the biological sciences. This lesson plan is appropriate for high school and undergraduate level teachers in the biological sciences. The topics in the discipline include microbes, environment, bacterial growth and adaptation, gas cycling, and greenhouse gases. The approximate time required for this lesson plan ranges between 120 and 150 minutes. This lesson plan includes a video micro lecture that provides an overview of microbes, their classification, and their importance in the biosphere. A very short video or an animation that describes the environmental factors required for microbial growth and explains the effects of changing environmental conditions on microbial growth by using temperature as an example. There is a reading that introduces the relationship between microbes and climate change while describing microbial diversity in different environments. A classroom activity that you may choose to do with your students to identify the relationship between a specific microbe and climate. Here is a step-by-step guide to using this lesson plan in your classroom or lab. We have suggested these steps as a possible plan of action. You may customize the lesson plan according to your preference and requirements. Introduce the topic. When teaching the topic of microbes, discuss the relationship between microbial life and climate. As climate change alters the environment, microorganisms respond, adapt, and evolve in their surroundings. Microorganisms have generation times that may be as short as a few hours. Therefore, they respond to environment and climate related changes at a faster rate compared to most other organisms. Thus, microbes are ideal systems for understanding the effects of climate change on biological systems. Play the first micro lecture, which is approximately 3 minutes, which just introduces what are microbes to provide an overview of microbes, their classification, and their role in the biosphere. This micro lecture titled What are Microbes is provided by RMIT University and includes contributions by Tagrid Istivan. Discuss the significant role of microbes in sustaining life on Earth. Next, play the animation or video provided titled Food Pathogens and Temperature to illustrate how microbial growth depends on various environmental factors. Use the graphs in the animation to explain the effect of changing temperature on microbial growth. Proceed to explain how global warming may affect microbial growth and establish a relationship between environment and microbes. The animation video titled Food Pathogens and Temperatures is provided by McGraw-Hill. Next, discuss the topic further through a reading activity. Use the handout in the reading titled Microbes and Climate Change to explain the crucial role of microbes in the environment. Discuss the role of microbes in gas cycling, the consumption and production of greenhouse gases by microbes, and the resulting effects on climate. This reading discusses the role of microbes in ecological systems and their role in the biogeochemical cycling of elements such as carbon and nitrogen. This handout and reading is provided by the Microbiology Society. Conduct a classroom activity. Next, help students explore this topic further in an engaging manner through a classroom activity titled Microbes and Climate. In this activity, students can use online resources to identify relationships between a specific marine microbe and the climate system. They will then present their findings. This activity is created through the Educational and Research Testing Hypothesis program from Monterey Bay Aquarium and Research Institute. You can use the tools and the concepts learned so far in this lesson plan to discuss and determine answers to the following questions for your students. What are microbes? What are the factors that influence microbial growth? What is the relationship between microbes and climate? How might climate change affect microbial growth and survival? The learning outcomes of this lesson plan. The tools in this lesson plan will enable students to 1. Describe the relationship between microbes, the environment and climate. 2. Describe microbial growth, its phases and key factors affecting microbial growth. And 3. Discuss the possible impacts of climate change on microbes. More lesson plans that integrate topics in the biological sciences with climate sciences can be found at tropicsu.org. These include a lesson plan on the impact of climate change on photosynthesis, impact of climate change on sex determination in sea turtles, teaching phenology in plants, leaf out, through climate-related examples, impact of climate change on circadian rhythms in sleep, ecosystems and food webs, plant diseases and climate change, insect behavior and climate change, photosynthetic pathways and physiological responses to changing climate, human health and climate change, phenotypic plasticity coping with climate change, metabolic rates, biodiversity through climate-related examples, and many more. In this next section, we'd like to showcase and show you how you can use some teaching tools to teach topics in biological sciences using a climate-related example. Some examples of these include a classroom or lab activity titled Climate Change and Phenology in Plants. In order to learn about phenology, phenological events, and to understand the potential impacts of climate change on phenology. A classroom or lab activity to establish the potential link between the geographic distribution of malaria and increasing temperature, which is caused due to global warming. A video lecture that gives an overview of how vegetation responds to climate change in terms of phenotypic plasticity, range shifts, phenology, and population changes. A teaching module that allows students to explore the role of stomata in regulating leaf temperature and water loss from plants under different climatic conditions. A simulator that allows users to change variables such as color of light, brightness of light, CO2 concentrations, and note their impact on photosynthetic efficiency. A reading that shows the effects of elevated CO2 levels on photosynthetic efficiency of field-grown plants, or how climate change can be a selective pressure in natural selection, and many other standalone teaching tools. Let us look at one in some detail. This is a classroom or lab activity, hands-on activity for your students titled Climate Change and Phenology in Plants. This classroom or lab activity is to learn about phenology and phenological events and to understand the potential impacts of climate change on periodic life cycle events in plants, specifically on the bloom date of North American lilac shrubs. You can use this tool to help your students find answer to questions such as: what are some phenological events in plants and animals? What are the possible impacts of climate change on the flowering of plants? So, if you are a teacher of the biological sciences and you are teaching topics such as phenology, phenological events, plant and animal life cycle events, flowering of plants, or migration of birds, you may choose to use this interactive, engaging lab activity for teaching these topics while integrating climate understanding amongst your students. This tool has been developed and is hosted at the Michigan State University at the link that is shown here. In this particular activity, students can plot data from 1961 to 2003 for the yearly first bloom date of North American lilac shrubs. They can determine the trend, they can understand what are the possible implications, and discuss whether there is evidence for climate change in this particular data. You may also choose to use a teaching tool such as the one shown here, which is a classroom or lab activity titled Squirrel Species Distribution and Climate Change. This is a classroom lab activity to examine and analyze squirrel species distribution and habitat data from the US over time and to interpret the possible relationship between climate change and changes in biodiversity. Students will analyze data for past and modern squirrel populations and habitats and will then interpret and discuss their findings. Using this tool, help your students find answers to: what are the habitats for different squirrel species? How has climate change affected squirrel species distribution over time? If you are a teacher in the biological sciences and you are teaching topics such as biodiversity, animal diversity, evolution and behavior, species and speciation, ecological populations, zoo geography, you may choose to use this interactive, engaging, hands-on practical activity while simultaneously increasing the understanding of both discipline topic and climate topic amongst your students. This activity has been developed by Beth Norman, Alan Ashworth, and Russell Graham and can be found at the SERC Center at Carleton College. In this activity, there are two parts. First, you access the Smithsonian Guide to Mammals. You predict and determine by referring to this database which animals belong to the squirrel family. You determine the modern habitats of different squirrel species. In part 2, you access another database called MyoMap, which allows you to determine past squirrel or habitat data. You can then have your students compare past data with modern data, interpret the results and observations such as differences in habitat, environment, climate shift, etc. You may also choose to introduce a video lecture in your teaching in your classroom, and this is a video titled Plant Responses to Climate Related Abiotic Stress. This is a video lecture that gives an overview of how vegetation responds to climate change in terms of phenotypic plasticity, rain shifts, phenology, and population changes. Students will learn about plant responses to increased CO2 levels, higher global temperatures, and changing precipitation patterns by discussing their impact on native vegetation. They will learn how plants respond to such environmental perturbations which could be caused due to climate change. You can use this video to help your students better learn about what are physiological plasticity in plants in response to climate-related abiotic stress factors. What is the difference between acclimatation and adaptation in plants in response to abiotic stress? So, if you are a teacher who is teaching topics such as abiotic stress, stress physiology, temperature variation, phenotypic plasticity, acclimatation, adaptation, physiological plasticity, range shifts, you may choose to use this teaching tool that effectively integrates topic in the biological sciences to simultaneously improve understanding of your students of climate change as well. This resource is available at Coursera and has been produced by Lawrence Venable from the University of Arizona. We hope teachers of biological sciences have found this lecture useful and will use the lesson plans and teaching tools that have been shown here. All the teaching tools and the lesson plans will be provided in this particular lecture. Thank you.